Please do take your seats. And our second reading from Scripture this morning is from Luke's Gospel, chapter 12. Do not be afraid, little flock, for your Father has been pleased to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions and give to the poor. Provide purses for yourselves that will not wear out, a treasure in heaven that will never fail, where no thief comes near and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Be dressed ready for service and keep your lamps burning, like servants waiting for their master to return from a wedding banquet, so that when he comes and knocks, they can immediately open the door for him. It will be good for those servants whose master finds them watching when he comes. Truly, I tell you, he will dress himself to serve, will make them recline at the table, and will come and wait on them. It will be good for those servants whose master finds them ready, even if he comes in the middle of the night or towards daybreak. But understand this, if the owner of the house had known at what hour the thief was coming, he would not have let his house be broken into. You also must be ready, because the Son of Man will come at an hour when you do not expect him. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. We're going to spend a bit of time together thinking about those verses from Luke chapter 12. If you heard last week, you might remember that we heard some really stark warnings from Jesus Christ about wealth. And we thought together how challenging those were for us in the place we live, in the time that we live in, taking the long view. We are amongst the wealthiest people who've ever lived. But as I was thinking through last week, I thought, well, I'd rather not be standing here telling you in detail what to do with your money. That feels like quite a scary thing for me to do. So last week we sort of left it a bit more general as start giving away your money. It was with some sadness then that I looked, well, not sadness, disquiet, shall we say, that I looked at the reading for this Sunday, and Jesus goes exactly where we don't want to go. Did you hear it at the start of the reading? Sell your possessions and give to the poor. He doesn't mince his words in the least there. You might know, Christians through history, in Scripture we find talk of the tithe, as it was always known, giving away 10% of your income. The thing about the tithe in the Old Testament, that it was giving out of what you received in income every year. And it's a good principle for Christians to follow. In Luke chapter 12, Jesus goes way, way beyond that. He doesn't say give out of your income. He says liquidate your assets. Take the money that you've been saving up. Take your possessions, sell them, and give that money away. So that's the tithe blown out of all proportion, we might say. It's really striking that when Jesus talks about money here, he prefaces it then with, do not be afraid. And I think the point of that must in part be that thinking about giving like that would make you afraid. There are all kinds of things in life that cause fear in us. But when are we afraid when it comes to money? Well, perhaps if you're looking ahead to this coming winter and all the news we're hearing about rising fuel costs, and you're looking at your monthly budget, say, and wondering, are these going to add up? Am I going to be able to heat my home? That's when you feel afraid. Seems to me that in part what Jesus is saying here, the fact that he says, do not be afraid, and then sell your possessions and give to the poor, like I said, he goes where I don't want to go. Your giving, the way that you use your money, should, if not for Jesus, make you feel a little bit scared. Am I giving away too much? Am I going to be able to make ends meet? That's where Jesus is so challenging to us today. And yet he can also say, do not be afraid. When you see your assets going to other people and not being used for yourself, whether that's at an individual level or at a church level, Jesus will say, do not be afraid of that. Although it would give you cause to be afraid, were it not for him. What is it about Jesus that means we can give like that? give to that level of sacrificial service, to the point of not just giving away some of our income, but seeing our assets go down. Well, that's what I think this reading here is designed to show us. And it's also, I think, what the early church knew maybe better than anyone else. I was reading again this week one of the very earliest accounts of the first Christians, and it had this line, which I always find very striking in it. It said this: "They have a common table, but not a common bed." Or, "They share their table, but they do not share their bed." The classical world, the ancient Roman world into which Christianity emerged and then took over and transformed, was a world in which people were very, very, very stingy with their money. The most elite of the elite had any wealth. They were a tiny minority for which the whole of the Roman Empire basically propped up and sent their money in to keep the elite, the emperor and the senators and so on, in the manner to which they'd become accustomed. People didn't give away their money, or if they did give away their money, they gave it away with the expectation that whoever they gave their money to would be in their debt. So they were benefactors who were known for their generosity, but they did it to gain the status and the acclaim and to gain basically people who were indebted to them. Very stingy with their money, and yet, at the same time, very, if you like, liberal with their bodies. If you've ever been to Pompeii, you can see just the incredibly sexual imagery all around you. A culture in which people really didn't care what other people did with their bodies. And the early church came along and was the exact opposite. The early church were very stingy with their bodies. They would say, have one sexual partner for life. That was, well, to some extent, unheard of in the early empire. At least that was not how the elites acted. But the Christians said, no, that is what God calls us to do. And yet, at the same time, they were very liberal, very loose with their wallets. And they gave their money away, and they gave their time and their energy for the good of their culture. In all kinds of ways, little babies who would have been left to die because they were girls, not boys. The early Christians just took them into their homes, into their churches. Widows who, once they'd lost their husband, would have been in a very precarious position in the Roman world, were given a status of honor in the Christian churches. Babies and widows, not because they could give anything back to the early church, but simply because the Christians wanted to give and be kind and reach out and serve those around them. They have a common table. Everyone's welcome here. We're not going to exclude you. Come and feast at our expense, but not a common bed. That was radical in the culture, and it was one of the reasons that the church took the world by storm. And the church grew from this tiny group of Jesus followers, who Jesus is basically speaking to in our reading, to become this institution that changed the Western world, at least, forever. So that we still think that charity is a good thing, and in most cases, marriage is a good thing. It's all to do with what Jesus was teaching right here, that we can, if you like, treat our wallets the same as they did, give even to the point of being a bit scared. The question is how? What is it about Jesus and his teaching that is so transformative, so radically transformative like that? At least two things that I've noticed in this reading. The first is the way that Jesus starts this whole thing about giving away your money, giving so that it scares you a bit. Verse 32, "Do not be afraid, little flock, for your Father has been pleased to give you the kingdom." The passage doesn't actually start with our giving and what God is calling us to do with our wallets, our time and our energy and so on. It starts with what God has already given to us. And the thing he's given, it says, is the kingdom, which might sound a little bit sort of religious language that doesn't mean very much. But at least to Jesus' first hearers, this would have been mind-blowing. Most people in Jesus' day, particularly if they weren't Jews, understood the sort of language here, the kingdom, as kind of end-of-the-world stuff. But most people thought that the world was going to come to an end and it was going to be remade again. And then it would sort of be made perfect, a bit like a freshly mown lawn or fresh falling of snow, just perfect and glistening and all arranged in rows. But then over time, everything would fall apart again. And so it would be reset over and over again, endless cycles of the rebirth of everything. That's this sort of kingdom language, looking forward to a day when God made everything new again and then it would all go bad again. The Jews, though, the very people into which Jesus was born, said something radically different from that. They said one day, just once, God is going to make everything new again, and it's never, ever, ever going to go bad. It's never, ever, ever going to be ruined. One day, everything made right. And Jesus comes along and says, that day is now, and it's in me. Through me, I'm going to give you that very thing. In fact, I already have given it to you. The Father has been pleased to give you the kingdom. Through the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, you can get in on the single most wonderful, transformative thing that will ever happen throughout all of history. You don't have to prove yourself. You don't have to make yourself worthy of it. The Father has been pleased to give it to you as you come to him through Jesus Christ. And I think the point is, if you know that, even if just in those little words, the Father has been pleased to give you the kingdom, if you just understand that, then that will, if you like, work through your whole ecosystem, your whole mind and thinking and body and everything you do, and make you into someone who can give away to other people. I mean, it's remarkably simple logic. Here you have been given the best thing, the greatest thing you could possibly think of. So you can give away everything else you have, and you won't be any the poorer. You might have seen this week, there was a story about a charity shop in Bewdley that was donated temporarily, so it turned out, a portrait of Jasper Carrott, the Birmingham comedian. And this portrait was thought to be worth thousands of pounds. But someone in the shop didn't realise, thought it was just something else to sell. It was part of a kind of art trail where people would go to the shop, have a look at the portrait and move on. That message didn't get through to one of the volunteers at the shop, so they sold this thousands of pounds of portrait for about 20 quid. And no one yet knows who's got this most precious possession. It's out there in the world somewhere. People are desperately trying to find it again and say, bit of a mistake, can we have our very expensive portrait back? We know you can't just give away expensive things. Whoever owns that precious piece wants it back because it's precious to them. But what Jesus says in Luke chapter 12, if you like, takes that perfectly reasonable logic by our definitions and blows it away. He says, look, here is the most precious thing you could possibly imagine. Take it, it's yours. And then you can give away everything else you have. Because compared to this, it's nothing. That's how I think we can begin to sell our possessions and give to the poor, to liquidate our assets, to give to the point of being a bit scared, because we've been given something so precious already. But the second reason we can do it is because, if you like, how we've been given this most precious gift. Because what Jesus goes on to say is really interesting in the rest of the reading. He doesn't just say, look, here's what you've been given. He, if you like, paints a picture of the sort of person who's given it to us. Now, it's interesting. He does that by talking a lot about his future return. You probably heard it. Be dressed ready for service and keep your lamps burning, like servants waiting for their master to return from a wedding banquet. The return of Jesus might fill us with a little bit of dread. If you've been at any of the Commonwealth Games stuff, you might have come across people, whether Christians or Jehovah's Witnesses, standing in as people are queuing and preaching or handing out literature. And a lot of the literature and a lot of the preaching you'll hear talking about the return of Jesus. He is coming back soon. Repent, he's coming. Whenever I've been to any of the events and I've heard or seen that, I've put my head down and tried to get past them as quickly as possible, truth be told, because I find it, quite frankly, a bit weird. Perhaps you've had that experience too. Is that really what the message that we're sharing, if we're Christians, is? Slightly shouting at people, Jesus is coming, look busy. What's so interesting in this part of Luke, when Jesus talks about his return, he uses the most extraordinary pictures to help us understand it. Verse 37 maybe drives that point home most of all. It will be good for those servants whose master finds them watching when he comes. Truly, I tell you, he will dress himself to serve, will make them recline at the table, and will come and wait on them. The picture of Jesus we get here at his return is not of someone staring down his nose at us, demanding that we serve him, but someone who gets down in the dirt and serves us. The language of he will dress himself is the language of, in Old English, girding up your loins. If you imagine me in great flowing robes like the people of Jesus' day would have done, to get down and to do any sort of hard work or to go and serve in the military, you'd have to do something quite complicated with your robes, basically tie them up a bit like a nappy. I'm glad I'm not wearing robes to show it to you now. But what you did was gather them all together and get them out of the way so that you could get on with hard labor. It's the equivalent of rolling up your sleeves in the ancient idiom. And what's so striking is Jesus does say in verse 35, be dressed ready for service, gird up your loins, get ready, roll up your sleeves and get stuck in helping what you need to help with in the world right now. But he only says that, I think, because in verse 37 he says that's exactly what I'm going to do myself when I come back, come and sit at my table. And in fact, of course, that's exactly what he has already done. The character of the person calling us to give away all that we have is one who has already given away everything for us. So if you like, he is coming back. Jesus says it very clearly. And if we don't know him, if we're distant from him and haven't got any relationship with him, it will be a bit like a thief in the night, with all the, frankly, fear that conjures. But if we know him, if we belong to him, then he won't be like a thief in the night, but like a friend in the day who loves us so much that he will give his own body to be broken for us. And when he comes back, we'll experience him as our servant king, who even then, at the moment of his greatest triumph, will say to us, come and sit with me and eat, and let me serve you as I already have. And I think the point is, to the degree that we know that about our King, our Master, that he is a servant like no other, who has given us such a rich, inestimable gift. To that extent, we in our own lives will be able to give to the point of being afraid, were it not for this King that we have. Sell our possessions, liquidate our assets. Now, this might mean all kinds of things for us and for our church over these next few months and years. Again, I'm not going to try and spell it out for us in any way, but just think, particularly in the midst of a culture, of a society right now, facing such an enormous cost of living crisis, and perhaps some of us here will feel that biting very hard over the next few months. What would a church look like that can respond to that? Not by following the culture being stingy with our money and liberal with our bodies, but being liberal with the money that God has given us, because he has been so generous to us already. Let's take a few moments in quiet as we respond in our own hearts, and then Joe is going to come and lead us in some prayers of intercession. But a few moments quiet, perhaps in quiet, silent prayer by ourselves to respond as we want to.